welcome to this edition of Border Report Live. Starting at the very top today with some developing news on the shocking allegations that the late Cesar Chavez abused young girls and women, leaving many across the country stunned. Even more surprising is that one of the women he's accused of raping is famed labor rights activist Dolores Huerta. A 2-year bombshell investigation by the New York Times detailed the years of alleged abuse by Chavez, who led the United Farm Workers Union. The 95-year-old Huerta, who was also co-founder of the UFW, said she stayed silent for more than half a century, worried her claims would hurt the farm worker movement. Huerta said Chavez fathered 2 of her children. And now cities, states, and institutions across the United States are quickly trying to remove Chavez's names from places that honor him. As Eitan Wallace tells us, many of those changes will start in California, where Chavez started the labor movement.
Well, in short, Newsom says he is open to changing the name of Cesar Chavez Day, but adds more conversations still need to happen before any final decision is made. In any case, he's running out of time, now less than 2 weeks until the official start of that holiday.
Well, it's been hard to absorb this.
Governor Gavin Newsom reacting Wednesday after civil rights leader and activist Dolores Huerta alleged the late Cesar Chavez sexually assaulted her and fathered 2 of her children. Her statement came the same day the New York Times released an investigation detailing accounts of 2 women who said they were molested by Chavez when they were young girls.
A figure we've long embraced and revered, and so now we're learning more. And you know, we have to be there for the back of the victims. You know, Jen and I are very close with Dolores. So many of us are, but very close. Have been for decades and decades, and none of us knew. I'm
still shaking a little bit about Dolores and all these young women. So I want you to say something first, and I'll jump in. It's a lot.
California's U.S. Senators Adam Schiff and Alex Padilla each releasing statements saying they stand with survivors. Assembly Speaker Robert Rivas echoing a similar message, as well as State Senate President pro tempore Monique Limon and Los Angeles Democratic Assembly member Mark Gonzalez.
Extremely heartbreaking. I represent downtown LA and Boyle Heights, and there's many murals in that area that feature Cesar Chavez as well. So I think that people will have to rethink what that looks like in our neighborhoods.
How many photographs I have in my house of Bobby Kennedy and Cesar Chavez. Woke up this morning, it was right there. 3 dozen schools in the state are named after Cesar Chavez. I don't know, community in the country. I traveled to 14 states the last few weeks. I think I was, in 14 Cesar Chavez streets in every part of this country. So we're just going to have to reflect on all of that.
Newsom will also reflect on whether to rename the official state holiday known as Cesar Chavez Day, observed for the last 2 decades on March 31st in Chavez on Chavez's birthday. Already, suggestions are coming in, with GOP Tulare Assembly member Alexandra Macedo saying she wants the name changed to Farm Worker Day. So will Newsom make a name change? Here's his answer.
I'm open. Those are important conversations. I think we need to have those conversations. I think that's the right thing to do.
And I'm told those conversations are ongoing. Meantime, I'm also told a state assembly resolution that was set to honor the life and legacy of the late Cesar Chavez has now been scrapped. Reporting in San Leandro, traveling with the governor, Eitan Wallace, Fox 5 News.
And we are learning that just a short while ago, California lawmakers did agree to change the name of Cesar Chavez Day to Farm Workers Day. And it isn't taking long for other states to cancel Chavez's legacy. Fresno State University in the school covered a statue of Chavez with a black cloth. As students passed, many took photos of the cloaked marker. Already, Texas Governor Greg Abbott says state agencies won't be celebrating Cesar Chavez Day here either. Cities, including Milwaukee and Lansing, Michigan, are canceling dinners or other celebrations commemorating the labor leader. Others are pushing to rename streets, schools, and landmarks after civil rights leader and farm worker advocate Dolores Huerta instead. Moving on to what else is trending across the border, $452 million. That's how much the new contractor is being paid to ensure Camp East Montana remains up and running at Fort Bliss in El Paso, Texas. An ICE spokesperson confirmed Amentum Services, Inc., a Virginia-based company, will take over after the agreement with Acquisitions Logistics was ended earlier this month. Camp East Montana is the largest migrant facility in the nation, and has been under fire since its opening. 3 detainees have died in the past few months. One of those deaths is actually being investigated as a homicide. U.S. Representative Veronica Escobar, who represents El Paso, is among 24 Democrats in Congress who have called for the closure of Camp East Montana. A 40-year-old Supreme Court decision that guarantees every child the right to a free public education, no matter their immigration status, is getting a second look. A House Judiciary Subcommittee hearing on Capitol Hill Wednesday looked to examine the Plyler v. Doe Supreme Court ruling. Republicans would like to see it overturned, arguing it places an uneven burden on Texas taxpayers and negatively impacts schools. Overturning the decision could allow states to track how many students are undocumented and bar certain kids from schools. Democrats argue doing that would harm public education in the country.
If states are required to educate illegal immigrant students, they must be allowed to identify the student population status to fully understand and address the adverse effects of Plyler v. Doe.
Eliminating Plyler would threaten the continuance of public education. Why? Because kids out of school have a tendency to attract their peers to leave school as well.
The Supreme Court ruling in the 80s was a narrow 5-4 decision. If the issue was brought back to the current high court, Republicans feel confident that it would be overturned. Markwayne Mullin has moved a step closer to becoming President Donald Trump's next Homeland Security Secretary. A Senate committee this morning narrowly advanced the nomination of the Republican senator from Oklahoma. The 8-7 vote came after a contentious hearing Wednesday and sent the cabinet nomination to the full Senate, which could act to confirm Mullin next week. That vote included a no from the Republican chairman Rand Paul of Kentucky and a yes from a Democrat, John Fetterman of Pennsylvania. Mullin was selected by Trump to replace fired DHS Secretary Kristi Noem. And speaking of things that are going on Capitol Hill, it's time now to bring in our San Diego correspondent Salvador Rivera, along with our guest for today's program, Pablo Manriquez of MigrantInsider.com. Thanks for joining us again, Pablo.
Thanks, Rudy.
Pablo, great to have you. I want to get into the DHS funding battle that's going on in Washington. There's sort of a Republican civil war going on about it. Kind of tell us what's going on behind the scenes and the negotiations that are taking place to keep funding DHS at current levels.
Yeah, so there are two things that are going on that are really important right now. One is the DHS shutdown, right? That began about a little over a month ago. Where the government funding bills, there were 7 appropriation bills, and one of them dealt with DHS. They funded 6 of them, and they singled out DHS for a shutdown. So DHS has been pre-funded through the One Big Beautiful Bill Act through 2029, but this is in effect defunding ICE, right? Like they're not going to get the money that they expected to get. So this was one of many catastrophes within DHS that led to the ultimate ousting of DHS Secretary Kristi Noem. So her replacement now, Senator Markwayne Mullin from Oklahoma, is up in front of the Senate Homeland Security Committee, where he is, really being brought through the ringer because the Senate Homeland Security Committee chairman has some very personal beef with Senator Mullin. So about a decade ago, Rand Paul, the Senate Homeland Security chairman, was tackled from behind in his front yard while he was mowing the lawn, and 6 of his ribs were broken by a neighbor. He got the living crap beat out of him by a neighbor. And Markwayne Mullin said on Valentine's Day during a town hall in Oklahoma that he can totally see why Rand Paul got beat up. He definitely sympathized with the neighbor instead of his own Senate colleague, Rand Paul. Now, this a couple weeks later, as luck would have it, as unluck, I guess, in the case of Markwayne Mullin, he ends up in front of Rand Paul for a job interview for the new DHS secretary. So yesterday I was in the room and it was tense. Chairman Rand Paul began the hearing by playing clips of Markwayne Mullin advocating for violence, right? Now, Markwayne Mullin has challenged witnesses in committee hearings to fights. He's a former MMA fighter himself. And Rand Paul basically said, how can we trust DHS to be run by somebody who has such an anger management issue, right? And Rand Paul told us after the hearing he's a hard no, which would in most cases make it so that Markwayne Mullin's nomination is very much in doubt. But unfortunately for Democrats, Senator John Fetterman the sort of wackadoodle senator from Pennsylvania, who is a sort of a Zionist. I don't know, nobody even really knows what this guy thinks anymore, but he is very much in favor of Markwayne Mullin's nomination. So the vote against Markwayne Mullin from his own Republican Rand Paul is likely to be canceled out by the Democratic vote by John Fetterman. So Markwayne Mullin, it appears likely that he will be DHS secretary. However, and this was a really interesting moment in yesterday's hearing. Markwayne Mullin claimed that he had gone on some sort of like top secret mission to somewhere. And the senators asked, okay, so tell us about this top secret mission. And Markwayne Mullin's like, well, I can't tell you about that. You're not authorized to know, which was hilarious because these are all senators. They have the same security clearance. So if Markwayne Mullin is authorized to know something, that his fellow senators, especially on the Homeland Security Committee, are also authorized to know it. So they took a step aside, they took a step out of the hearing, and they went into a private SCIF, what's called a secured briefing room. And Markwayne Mullin, when Senator Blumenthal emerged from the SCIF, was basically like, we emerged with more questions than we had going in, because Markwayne Mullin just can't explain what the heck he was talking about, these top secret missions he went on when he was a member of the House of Representatives a few years ago. So it's a disaster. It doesn't look like DHS, at least ICE and Border Patrol, is going to be funded anytime soon. But another sort of caveat to it that's really interesting is that the senator from Alabama, Katie Britt, who's the lead appropriator on DHS, she continues to object to funding TSA, to funding FEMA and stuff like that, and then claiming Democrats are objecting. But it's not. An objection is a Senate procedure. It's very well documented. Republicans are objecting to funding these essential agencies while Democrats block the funding of ICE and Border Patrol.
We're speaking with Pablo Manriquez of MigrantInsider.com. We're going to take a very quick break, and we're going to get right back into it with everything that's happening up on Capitol Hill with him when we come back. So stay with us. Border Report Live is back in 2 minutes. And welcome back to this edition of Border Report Live. Joining me today, San Diego correspondent Salvador Rivera, and our guest for today's program, Pablo Manriquez of MigrantInsider.com.
Pablo, I wanted to ask you, we've been hearing about masks and ICE agents wearing them, the option not to wear them, asking them not to wear it. What's the latest on that? What are you hearing there in Washington?
So as part of the DHS shutdown, Democrats have I think they have 5 sticking points that they are requiring before they're willing to vote to fund DHS, and making the ICE agents take off their masks is one of them. Now, the White House this week got back with a counter proposal to Democrats that was a joke. I mean, it basically included a bunch of things that already exist in existing law. Basically, they're saying like, well, we're breaking the law. We're willing to follow the law if you fund us. So it was a nonsensical counter proposal. But one thing that was missing from that counter proposal is masks. And the reason why the White House doesn't want ICE agents to be required to take their mask off is because once they take their masks off, obviously the ICE agents who have been committing these atrocities, who have been committing, gross acts of physical misconduct against citizens, immigrants, undocumented people, everybody they see, they can be more easily identified and then sued or prosecuted. So it's very important to Stephen Miller, Donald Trump's senior immigration advisor, to basically create a secret police force that's completely unaccountable, that can terrorize the population. And a lot of people say that this is moving toward the election. They want to have an environment of fear going toward the election so that these masked ICE agents can turn up at the polls and intimidate people. And Markwayne Mullin, the DHS secretary nominee, yesterday did not take that off the table. He was asked very explicitly by Senator Slotkin, do you support ICE agents at the polls? And Markwayne Mullin said, well, what if there's a threat at the polls? Of course we'll send them. Well, that's never happened. In World War II and Vietnam, there are local police, there's FBI, there are a lot of different people that can show up at the polls to protect the poll. There's like a bomb threat or something like that. But he's not taking that off the table. So masks are a sticking point. I asked Senator Chuck Schumer yesterday, and interestingly, I said, is it a red line for you? Do masks remain a red line? And he did not say yes, like he normally does. So I don't know if that means that there's a little bit of traction there on the Republican position or not, but polling is showing, and Schumer is a very poll-oriented and poll-motivated minority leader. He said, polls show that Americans overwhelmingly, even 1 in 5 Trump supporters, say that it's completely inappropriate for these to be secret police, and that law enforcement should identify themselves with their faces shown. They should be proud of the work they're doing instead of hiding behind masks like cowards.
Sure. Now, speaking of ICE agents, their pseudo boss is Tom Homan, who has been accused of taking $50,000 as a bribe, money that was given to him in a paper bag. What's going on with that? And any resolution ever come of that?
No, it's kind of funny. Every time Pam Bondi and every time Kash Patel go before, and before them, Kristi Noem, go before Congress, they ask, has the money been returned? Everybody accepts that Kash Patel received, Tom Homan received a Cava bag, like the restaurant Cava, filled with $50,000. It was a bribe. Everybody knows it was a bribe, and the FBI was investigating it. And then Pam Bondi quashed the investigation. And the big question from senators and the big question from the House has been, has the money been returned? They don't expect at this point that the Trump administration is actually going to do the right thing and prosecute Tom Homan, although that could still be coming in the aftermath on the back end of the administration. But yeah, it's kind of wild because they won't say. They're just like, that investigation has been closed. So as it stands, Tom Homan walked away with $50,000 cash of taxpayer money, right? And the Republicans and the Trump administration are just like, yeah, he can keep it, which is crazy. It's absolutely crazy. But yeah, Tom Homan is a career law enforcement official. He's very much like, as I understand it, he's very popular amongst the agents that he's worked with. Before, under Obama, when he was the operations director at ICE, he was more of a logistics guy, making sure people had uniforms, making sure that the paychecks arrived on time. But now he's very much a spokesperson. He's become sort of like an influencer. Like he loves being on TV, and that was a big tension point between he and Kristi Noem, who got to be on TV the most. So now that Kristi Noem's out, I think that Tom Homan is trying to emerge again, but this $50,000 that's still completely missing, that's never been returned, nobody knows where it is, continues to pop up as part of his reputational dynamic.
And what was the money for?
Well, so the money, as we understand it, was for contracting. It was some of his buddies. And he had a nonprofit called Border 911, and he was kind of putting money out all over the place and prepping. He was really priming the pump for Trump's return to office, right? So that he could choose these contractors, pick his friends, and make some people rich. I don't know specifically what the money was for. All we know is that it came from the FBI. It was an undercover sting operation where they handed him a literal Cava bag with $50,000 cash in it, and that money has since disappeared. That's really all we know. Beyond that, he was creating this Border 911 network of far-right lunatics that were, that existed at the time during Biden, to sort of like, we're going to patrol the border because Biden won't. Well, now those far-right lunatics are becoming generationally wealthy overnight in this one big beautiful bill act money, the $170 billion that was approved by Congress and signed into law the last 4th of July by Donald Trump.
Sure. I wanted to ask you, Pablo, and we're talking with Pablo Manriquez of migrantinsider.com. I wanted to ask you, Pablo, about another little skirmish that's going on, originating in Washington, the Iran military activity that's going on, the intervention over there. What are you hearing in Congress, and how long is this going to go on for? What do you think?
I mean, it looks like an open-ended war at this point. You know what I mean? Like, we've gotten into something, first of all, Iranians are very proud people. They have a cultural identity that goes back thousands of years. It's something that we as Americans can't necessarily really grasp. We're a country that tends to think of ourselves, we're having the 250-year anniversary of America this year. For Persians, they think of themselves as a 5,000-6,000-year-old culture. So when you attack them like this, you're attacking their ancestors, and it goes way back. So it doesn't look like this is going anywhere. The big sort of on the hill, I think that what we're seeing is that a lot of people are starting to lose faith in Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary. He likes to call himself the Secretary of War, but he's a clown, right? And he's a joke, and everybody thinks he's a joke. And he likes to get up and give big speeches and tell chiseled jaw military leaders that they're fat and they need to quit being gay and whatever, right? But it's like everybody kind of looks at him and is like, "What are you talking about, guy?" And Pete Hegseth is a former Fox News host. He's more of an entertainer than a bureaucrat. And the Department of Defense, having one of the biggest workforce in the federal government and the biggest budget in the federal government, really requires a bureaucrat. I know we don't like bureaucrats in Washington and stuff like that, but you need somebody who knows where the cash flows and where accountability flows so that the buck can stop at the top of the chain. Pete Hegseth finds himself at the top of the chain, but he's just a yes man. Like, that's all he is to Donald Trump. And the Iranians and our allies abroad see that. And I think that that's one of the things that's really starting to put pressure on Congress, is that the allies abroad, Congress travels the world through CODELs and stuff like that. They make relationships with foreign ministers, with secretaries of state all around the world. And they're hearing from these people. And they're like, who is this Pete Hegseth? We're not going to work with him because we don't trust that he's competent. And frankly, Pete Hegseth is not competent. So it's obvious to the entire universe. So at this point, the big fracture within the MAGA movement is that Trump and Pete Hegseth and Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, both kind of came out in the early days of the war and said that we got into the war because Israel told us to. And there is a lot of anti-Israel sentiment, both in the MAGA movement and especially among Democrats right now, that they are kind of, a lot of people say they're kind of pulling the strings. Well, when Marco Rubio comes out and says we did it because Israel told us we had to, it kind of confirmed a lot of their worst suspicions. And now, it's just another factor that makes Donald Trump the most historically unpopular president since polling. This is just another element of that. So Pete Hegseth is not somebody who anybody finds to be a reliable leader of the biggest military in the world, right? Marco Rubio said the quiet part out loud that we did it because Israel told us to. And Donald Trump is trying to pivot out of it now through Truth Social posts that no one is paying attention to. That's basically where we're at.
Well, speaking of Pete Hegseth, I know Saturday Night Live loves the guy. He provides great fodder for them.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you something. We almost made it through the whole episode today without talking about the Epstein files. What are you hearing on that subject?
Well, that's another element of the Iranian war, right? So everybody around the world is now beginning to classify, or at least the narrative that's developed globally, is that the reason why we attacked Iran is to distract from the Epstein files. So it really is kind of the Barbara Streisand effect. Barbara Streisand famously said, "Don't take pictures of my house." And as soon as she said, "Don't take pictures of my house," the whole world was like, "Why? Why don't you want me to take?" And everybody starts Googling her house. I had no idea Barbara Streisand even had a house until she said, "Don't take pictures of the house." So with the Epstein files, by attacking Iran, everybody's like, "Why are they attacking Iran?" Well, it's to cover up for the Epstein files. So what are the Epstein files? So anybody around the world who wasn't already talking about the Epstein files is very much talking about the Epstein files now, because it's kind of tied into this geopolitical conflict that, the global news cycle can no longer escape.
And Pablo, I wanted to ask you, kind of staying on the topic of Pete Hegseth. We were talking about Markwayne Mullin earlier because of Kristi Noem being kicked out of the position by President Trump. A lot of folks saw that as she started becoming more and more unfavorable on both sides of the aisle. Is there any word on the street that maybe someone like Hegseth or maybe a Pam Bondi talking about the Epstein files may be next on the chopping block in the administration?
I think that in the bro culture that is the Trump White House, Pete Hegseth seems pretty safe, but Pam Bondi and Tulsi Gabbard, the national security advisor, are both very much on the ropes. Pam Bondi came to a classified hearing yesterday with members of Congress, and everybody left the briefing just completely dissatisfied. She doesn't want to testify before Congress again because they feel that Kristi Noem's testimony before Congress a couple of weeks ago was one of the final nails in the coffin of her secretariat. So I think that if I'm betting, Tulsi Gabbard is probably the next one to be fired. It'll either be Bondi or Gabbard. And then, the big danger, and the reason why it's very dangerous to fire cabinet secretaries, is if an unpalatable alternative is put forward and the Senate doesn't confirm them, then you end up like we did in the first Trump term with interim cabinet secretaries. You end up with like the toilet salesman as the the attorney general. So we literally had a toilet salesman as attorney general in Trump's first term. I don't know if anybody remembers that, but it happened. And it could happen again if the Senate doesn't confirm a replacement. So it's kind of like, which is the worst case scenario? Pam Bondi, who everybody's lost faith in, Tulsi Gabbard, who everybody's lost faith in, or a toilet salesman as an interim, right? So that's at the Department of Homeland Security right now. We have no idea who's in charge at this point. Like, there hasn't been an interim officially named, and the assumption is that Markwayne Mullin is going to be confirmed. But Rand Paul still hasn't called for a vote yet on the DHS secretary. It was supposed to happen today. That's a story that's kind of gotten swept under the rug of the Iran conflict. But we'll see. I would bet that the next one's out will be Tulsi Gabbard and or Pam Bondi. It really kind of depends on who upsets the president the most and who is vying internally. This is always the case in any presidency, that anytime there's blood in the water, other people are kind of try and come in and replace them. So, if there are strong players trying to replace Pam Bondi or Tulsi Gabbard, then obviously then that makes them even more vulnerable. But at this point, it's kind of like, who would actually want this job? Like, your whole job is as the attorney general is to cover up for a pedophile ring, a global pedophile ring, which is very much in which your boss, the president of the United States, is very much implicated. So it's a thankless job, to say the least. And I think the guy to really watch right now is the deputy attorney general, Todd Blanche, because he's the one guy who seems to be really threading the needle in staying low key enough to not be blamed for everything, but also not high key enough to be a likely replacement. So, I guess if there is one piece of institutional knowledge, oddly enough, it's Donald Trump's former personal attorney, Todd Blanche. So Pam Bondi probably on the outs, Tulsi Gabbard probably on the outs. We'll have to see.
All right. Thank you so much, Pablo. We've been speaking with Pablo Manriquez of migrantinsider.com. Unfortunately, we're out of time. It always happens to us. We run it right down to the zeros on these editions with you. Thanks for joining us again, Pablo.
Thanks, Rudy. Thanks, Salvador.
All right. Stay with us. Border Report Live is back in 2 minutes. Welcome back to this edition of Border Report Live. Really quick, wanted to remind you before we go for the day that you can stay informed on the stories shaping the U.S.-Mexico border while on your commute home. Maybe you're out for a run or taking the dog out for a walk, as Border Report Live brings you real-time updates, expert insights, and voices from both sides of the border in podcast form. You can listen now at any of the apps on the bottom of your screen. That's going to do it for us today. For Salvador Rivera in San Diego, I'm Rudy Mireles in Harlingen, Texas. We'll see you next time.